Good afternoon, lovelies. I hope, as ever, you're all doing well. You find me in my little kitchen corner with the sofa that the husband and I managed to fit in our tiny, tiny galley kitchen, and my cooking books and my various aprons, which is all very sweet and cozy, which is what I need at this point of the day. I've got my mint tea, as you've seen, and yes, I know, I think I have a mint tea in every video. I'm not particularly diverse when it comes to teas. Okay, saying that, I have many teas in my cupboard, but I don't drink most of them because I seem to be really intolerant to caffeine these days, so it makes makes my choices somewhat limited. Anyway, so today I thought for this video I would go through all of the breakfast toppings that I like to use. I recently released a post on my blog crumbsofsanity.com about possible breakfast topping options, and I thought I would make a video to nicely partner that. I know it's not massive headlines, it's not particularly interesting, it's definitely massive first world problems if you want to deep dive into what breakfast toppings you should have in the morning. But you know what, I've spent years investigating different options and researching it, partly because it's a wonderful procrastination tool, but because I quite frankly hate the mornings. I hate them, and the idea that I could have a slightly interesting breakfast almost makes it worthwhile getting up. So yeah, so I thought I would share my years of knowledge and experience on the subject. And you know what, given that YouTube is a world of first world problems, I thought I was in good company. So if you too consider breakfast's an incredibly important theme in your day, then this is the video for you. So obviously stay tuned. And in the meantime, I'd love it if you commented, give me some fresh ideas, some fresh things to look into and try. Please do like, only if you like it though. And I'd love it if you subscribed, because it really makes me feel like I should make more of these, instead of feeling like my videos are being posted out into the wilderness, into the black void, and it has never seen the light of day. So shall we get started? So let's get into it. I'm afraid today the light is pretty abysmal, so many apologies for that, but I feel that most of the information that you'll be getting will be oral as opposed to visual, so hopefully that won't make a massive difference. Right, so these are toppings, most importantly, that you can use for most sweet breakfast, I'd say. So porridges, any kind of porridge type breakfast. So I know there's porridges that can be made from rye flakes, amaranth, I think, you've got semolina, those sort of consistencies. You've also got smoothie bowls, or just smoothies, but of course the benefit of putting into the bowl is not only do you look trendy and it becomes immediately Instagrammable, but you have more space for the toppings, which is the key part of a smoothie bowl in my opinion. And of course you have got yogurts, any kind of yogurt type breakfast. So yogurt quark, you've got the Sky yogurt, Sky or Skyr or whatever you want to call it, the Scandinavian yogurts, anything like that. And of course you can use these on pancakes, any kind of pancake, and you can use these on waffles and things like that. I mean, be inventive. You can use, I mean, you can even use this on ice cream if you really wanted to. So you know, the world is your oyster when it comes to breakfasts like these. So I thought I'd start with sweeteners. So a lot of people, you know, don't want to use sweeteners because they don't need to, or because they don't want to add, you know, any sugar or calories to their meals. Fair enough. But if you decide you want to, you have several options. So of course you can start with sugar, any kind of sugar. I like coconut sugar because it's a bit like brown sugar in that it's quite caramelly, but it's still subtle and it's meant to be healthy. It makes it feel healthy putting coconut sugar in. but it is expensive, and no doubt next year they'll tell us that it's actually absolute crap. So do what you will with that. So you have your sugars. You could also use things like honey or agave syrup if you want to use like a vegan version. For both of those, you've got many, many versions. I think I have here, this is in German because I live in Germany. This is a lavender honey, and it's incredibly, well, it's quite thick. You can see that kind of consistency. Oh, it's quite thick. So it's good for blending. It's not so good for adding on top of things, but I do actually like how it slightly crystallizes when it hits kind of a cold yogurt. So I do still use it. Maple syrup is also a favourite, but it does have that kind of maple taste. It's almost like burnt sugar. So it does add a little bit of a flavour, but you know what? It's not a big deal if that's all you've got. Otherwise, if you are doing a blending situation and it doesn't matter kind of what form the sweetener takes, I would consider using dates or prunes. And they don't need to be particularly soft and succulent if you're blending them, but they will add sweetness and potentially more fibre, although I don't know whether it changes the fibrous quality. But it is a kind of healthier option when it comes to sweetening. And of course, bananas. Bananas are always fantastic, which is why smoothies so often use it. Not only does it give great texture and body, but it's usually naturally very sweet if you use the right ones. So that's always a firm favourite. So moving on from the sweeteners, which for me is the least interesting category, partly because a lot of these toppings will have a natural sweet flavour. Think about flavourings. I don't often add flavourings to my breakfast because I usually find that the ingredients themselves lend very well to the flavourings. But sometimes you want to spice things up, no pun intended, and you want to make things more interesting, and maybe you've had the same thing all week. So, cardamom. Cardamom, I think, is incredibly underrated when it comes to breakfast. It goes beautifully with banana. So if you're making a smoothie or some kind of porridge, I would really, really recommend using cardamom. It is really quite lovely, and just a little bit really brings out the flavours of the other ingredients. It also goes very well with blueberries. You can also consider things like nutmeg and cinnamon, which I'm sure everyone is well acquainted with because, you know, you usually have that in lots of kind of seasonal Christmassy baking, and it really makes the kitchen smell lovely when you use it. So you can also consider essences. Sorry, I've got something in my eye which is really ruining the vibes of this video. Anyway, so you can also use essences, and vanilla essence obviously is a firm favourite, is used all the time in cooking. You can also think about maybe like an orange blossom. I'm not sure I would add peppermint, but you know what, go for it if you want. I have rose water, which I find sometimes is really lovely. Depends on the ingredients you put with this. So I think with berries, it goes really well, particularly strawberries. Put a little bit in your yogurt or a little bit in your smoothie, and it can taste really lovely and floral, but don't add too much because then it will taste like bubble bath. So those are the flavourings and essences I would consider adding. Of course, there are many, many more. The list is endless, but I feel that these things, they're only little touches, maybe not so important and less exciting than other toppings, but things you might want to consider anyway. Okay, so now for the fresh toppings. Now, of course, because they are fresh, they need to stay in the fridge, which means that you should be having a regular rotation of these if you want to have them regularly. And of course, you need to really check that they are still usable once you get to them. So these are the kinds of things that I end up not having on my porridges or my yogurts or whatever most often because I forget. And I'm a cheapskate sometimes and can't be bothered to spend €5 or £4 or whatever that is in dollars on blueberries. So yeah, but if you are doing a blended number, yet again, frozen fruits work perfectly well, whether you frozen them yourself, you know, like, you know, if you've got some bananas hanging around, you know, you won't use, just break them up, put them in a bag, put them in the freezer. Same with berries, but with berries, make sure when you throw them in a bag, lay them flat in the freezer, and once frozen, you can put them all together again. It stops them clumping into big kind of cubes of fruit, so it makes it hard to use bits of it at a time. And of course you can buy frozen options, but these are all very good if you are blending, making a smoothie, or using a smoothie in something else. Not so good if you want to add to yogurt or put it in porridge, although I'm sure it will defrost while making the porridge, but it will take a lot longer. So think about fruits. Bananas are really great to have on standby. Berries are also fantastic and look really great in a smoothie bowl. Very Instagrammable. So these are things I would consider. I would also consider maybe, and this does not go for your yogurts, because of course that is what I'm suggesting. If you're making a porridge or a smoothie bowl, maybe think about adding like a little spoonful of yogurt into it, or at the end, particularly for porridges. I do like to add like a moist maker, as Ross says in Friends, to my porridge, just in case it's a little bit dry or I feel like I need a little bit more, well, wetness essentially. So a spoonful of yogurt, of quark, of Icelandic yogurt, of mascarpone, even cream if you want, just add a little bit of that. I mean, maybe custard, although I think you're kind of going into dessert territory there. Those all work really well. Also, you can even add a little bit of coconut milk just on top, which then when you spoon into the porridge, it'll nicely settle and kind of drizzle in there. So those are the fresh things I would think about, and kind of an appendix to the fresh. These are things that you may keep in your fridge. I would also consider maybe fruit puree, like an apple puree or an apple mousse. Also chutneys, fruit chutneys, marmalades, jams. These things, of course, keep a lot longer, but they're also nice additions, as is compote, any kind of fruit jus maybe, although I think a jus is savoury usually. Anything like that. Steeped fruits also works really well. Okay, now for the dry toppings, which to me is the most exciting part. Partly because it's probably the most sustainable things to invest in. They last a long time, and they're quite fun to kind of adorn and organise onto your breakfasts. And they're pretty to look at. So let's go through those. And I will, hopefully, if I remember to do this, I will provide some cutaway to what they actually look like, so you get a better sense as opposed to me kind of shaking the jars or pots in front of you. Okay, so let's start with the most simple. Of course, you can use dried fruit. I have here some dried figs, which, as you can see, I'm running low of, but any dried fruit, I don't really think I need to go into it. I think everyone knows what that could be. You know, crack on, try all that out. The exotic ones, of course, you've got dried mangoes and papayas and pineapple. You've got dried berries. I also have some freeze-dried raspberries, which you can crush up and sprinkle, which is in one of my videos, which I will point down to in the description. And anything like that goes really well. You can sprinkle them on top. You can chop them up and add them to your porridge or your smoothie bowl or your yogurt or your pancakes or whatever, and it of course adds natural sweetness, which is great, and a little bit of fibre. So that's probably the most obvious thing. The second most obvious would be seeds and nuts. So I particularly like cashews to be on my topping. I also like to throw them in to a smoothie when I'm blending them up, because it adds like a nice sort of creamy quality. And I also like walnuts. Pecans would be lovely, as would Brazil nuts if you chop them up a little bit. I would recommend with any seeds and nuts that you first toast them. So put a frying pan on a medium heat without any oil and throw in your nuts and seeds, and then shake them about a few times. Do not leave them because they burn quickly. And once they're smelling toasty and they're starting to pop a bit and brown, then you know they're done. In terms of seeds, most seeds I think you can toast. Pine nuts are lovely, although you might feel it gives too much of like a pesto pasta vibe. I like pumpkin seeds. They're my favourite. They toast beautifully, have a lovely green colour, and tastes fantastic. You can also, of course, use sunflower seeds. That's always a very good option. There are also smaller seeds worth trying. So we've got the humble chia seed, which is now in everything because it's meant to be incredibly good for you with omega, God knows what. There is also sesame seeds. I like the black sesame seed, but you do have to be a little bit careful. If you put too much in, it starts to taste like Chinese food. And there's also flax seeds, which are really quite beautiful and they look really nice and they've got like a very, very soft, mild crunch. Those are nut and seed options. You could also use granola, shop bought or homemade. I have my homemade version here. It's a Nigella recipe. It's her olive oil granola. Fantastic. It's got kind of like a savoury, sweet kind of tang, which goes well with everything and doesn't make it feel like you're eating what usually seems to be incredibly sugary oats. That's an excellent option. I would also suggest perhaps some coconut in the form of desiccated coconut or flakes. I've got some over here. This goes really well if you want to do kind of a tropical theme, so with like mangoes, with a bit of coconut milk, with some interesting kind of nuts and seeds. Some other things that are maybe a little less obvious, but I actually think work really, really well in this context is bee pollen. It's not the most budget-friendly option, but it does last an incredibly long time. And it has almost like a bitter aftertaste, but kind of like a honey bitter, how you'd imagine kind of sucking on like a bit of honeycomb would taste like. It's really, really lovely and it's supposed to have kind of health benefits if you pick bee pollen from your local area. It's meant to help with allergies. I've not found that, but it is really lovely and it looks beautiful. Stay tuned for the up close in a second. Other than that, I would also consider cacao nibs. I've got a nice bag here. And these are essentially cacao seeds, I think they're seeds, which have been kind of bashed up into little broken up nibs. And they're intensely dark and chocolatey, almost kind of like 100% chocolate, but they're very crunchy and they give like a really nice depth. It's almost like coffee-like. And I don't like coffee, but this is great. So that would be absolutely recommended. Otherwise, I would think of superfood powders. So like berry powders, they do like acai, I think, moringa, spirulina, super greens. I have one that is blackcurrant powder, which is almost like a little bit damp when you use it, but it's essentially freeze-dried whatever it is and then pulverized, and you've got this really intense flavor. So I could have put that in the flavoring section, but I feel like keeping a little bit onto your porridge or yogurt really adds a little bit of a kick. So lastly, my other suggestion in the dry toppings category would be nut butters. And I call that the dry category because this is what you'd keep in a cupboard. It's not actually dry, but it will last forever. So nut butters, seed butters, I mean, even like chocolate spread. Think about all those things. Pistachio butter. I have several here. These are not my entire stash, but I'm not going to show you all of them. This is sunflower and cocoa seed butter, kindly gifted by my best friend. This is a pistachio. It's called a pistachio mousse, but it's really pistachio butter. And then I have a nice, big, chunky jar of peanut butter. Smooth is my preference. I know, shock horror, but I think it goes a lot better on a porridge than the really chunky, crunchy kind. So nut butters, absolutely fantastic. They go on anything and really add some depth, add some protein, and I mean, who doesn't like peanut butter? Obviously, if you're allergic, ignore that little section. Okay, so this final section, and bearing in mind that this is not an exhaustive list, but I find these things will be easy to get hold of. They're a bit more accessible, and also you've got to start somewhere, right? So the last thing I would suggest is if you really want to go out there a little bit, it's like 3 or 4 other things. So you can consider edible flours. They always look nice. I don't really get much for the texture and flavour, but it looks pretty. So you can consider that. You can also consider going to some kind of Scandinavian shop if you can find it. Now they do some very interesting berries like bilberries, cloudberries. There are lingus berries, is that the right word? I don't know. But they do some very interesting types of berries. They're nice to get hold of. I have not managed this, given I've not spent a lot of time looking into it, but given they are champions of the porridge, I would suggest maybe looking into that avenue if you're interested. Another thing I would consider is raw nola. This is fresh, so it needs to be eaten rather quickly. But generally speaking, you just kind of mix together oats, mashed up banana, nuts, seeds, dried fruit, until you get kind of a crumbly mixture that looks like granola. And you can just crumble this over your food. You can even smush it down into a tin and put it in the fridge so it hardens slightly, and cut them into squares like a cereal bar. So this is a really nice idea, but again, it only lasts for like 2 or 3 days in the fridge, so you really need to be committed. Sorry, I'm having a little tea break. I'm talking a lot. I think this is an epic woman's splain, if anyone agrees. So the last thing I would also consider is, and I would certainly make sure that these are homemade, otherwise you're basically just having dessert, but making your own sorbet or ice cream, even like a miso ice cream, something like that, that has kind of a few health properties. Making your own sorbet or ice cream and then just spooning some of that on top of whatever you decide to go for. It will of course last for a long time because you have to freeze it, but you do have to go through the hassle of making it. I've tried it once. It's pretty delightful, I won't lie, and it makes your breakfast look quite interesting. But of course you need to make it, which, you know, life's too short for most people, so why would you? Okay. So lastly, before I love you and leave you, I thought I would throw a few book recommendations to you. They have been referenced a few times in my blog already, but they are so good that I think you guys should know about it, and this is where I've got a lot of my information and ideas. So the most important one, which I believe I put in another video which talked about my recipe books, is The Porridge Book by Annie Kravy. It's genius. I love her. I don't know who she is, but I love her. I believe she is Swedish, certainly Scandinavian, and she goes through all of these breakfast ideas, which I have certainly borrowed a lot from. And she goes through porridges, both sweet and savoury, made from different grains. She goes through porridge toppers. She also goes through all sorts of little snacks. And I believe it is for the most part vegan, I believe. I think there are definitely vegan options. And she really does make use of nuts and seeds to make these toppings. And if you don't want to make anything from it, just buy it for the pictures because they are great. So that's number one. Secondly, I would consider the book Spoon by Annie Morris and Johnny Shimmin. I loved this book. I got some ideas from it. The only issue with this, some of the things that they specify, I think are quite laborious, require a lot of things that I wouldn't just buy in a normal shop. I think that it's a very intentional book. You really need to set out to make these things, which isn't a bad thing if you want a project on like a Sunday afternoon. I often am quite lazy, so don't do that. But if you want some really nice in-depth ideas, particularly for granolas, I'm just going to have a look. Granolas, muesli, porridge, birches, savoury things, smoothies, and this, they've got you covered. Finally, and this is a new addition to my recipe book library, is the Good Mornings book by Deborah Kalopa and Mark Roper. It rhymes. Most of this is vegan, I believe, if not all of it. And I'm not vegan, so I haven't taken that much from this. And I would say a lot of this is breakfast. It's all the kinds of breakfast. So sweet, savoury, eggs, baking, veggie things. So it doesn't really kind of focus in on the kind of breakfast I'm talking about. But you know, if you want to expand your network of breakfast ideas, then that's a good suggestion. So anyway, I've almost finished my tea, which means that I need to get on to do other things now. But I hope you found this a little bit interesting, helpful, useful. As always, anyone out there in the middle of their thesis, this isn't the worst idea to interject some mindfulness into your life in the mornings. I found it helpful. It did not ultimately solve any of my problems, but it's food. It can only do so much. So, as I said before, please do comment, like, subscribe. Check out my blog, crumbsofsanity.com, where I've put my post on toppings on there. I've also got a few recipes that include toppings. There's a banana bread, porridge based. There is a smoothie bowl, and I believe there are a couple of other things I can't remember. So do feel free to check that out. And if you have any ideas that I haven't thought of, please do let me know, because I'm always looking for the next high in my life. Anyway, I love you guys. Stay safe, stay well, and I will see you soon.